And I think Troy Carter's all teed up. We're going to start talking forests and some nature-based solutions with Troy. And he's with Earthshot Labs. And I know I saw you in here. So yeah, there you are. Cool. So if you want to, yeah, look at that. Look at that, California. You're out in California, aren't you?
I am.
Yeah, looks like nice little breeze, nice little nature setting there. I love it. You know, it's you're actually our last person of the day. So let's enjoy it, and let's enjoy this nice, beautiful breeze here, and hear about what Earthshot Labs is doing.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for the little introduction. I'm not exactly sure who's on this call right now, but there's a couple things that I'd be happy to talk to today. One is talking about Earthshot itself and what we do, but then also maybe a wider perspective on how do we direct more money into nature restoration and conservation? Because I think probably all of us, listening and sort of in this room right now, like there's a crisis of really epic proportion going on right now. And it's not just around climate, it's also biodiversity. It's around the continuation of life and the many also species that are not humans, right? And, more than 70%, there's been more than 70% biodiversity loss just in the last 50 years. And that's like whatever, it's an incredible statistic. Just since the 70s, 70% of all plants, animals, and smaller critters have disappeared from the face of the planet, like still existing in small populations of species. And so we need to do something about that. And how we do that is with incentive structures. So like right now, as a civilization, we have decided that we pay people to chop down trees, we mine, we build civilization, like all, greater and greater complexity. That's great. And it's pretty imbalanced right now. And we're sort of going towards a pretty hard end if we continue in that direction. And so there needs to be a balancing mechanism for paying people to protect and restore forests in particular, but also ocean and other ecosystems. So that's really what Earthshot is about building the infrastructure to address these financial incentives across the planet. And right now, carbon markets are one of the few financing structures that actually directly addresses reforestation and conservation. They're a very imperfect mechanism, but it's sort of what we have. And maybe I'll just jump into a couple slides, even though they're not, maybe necessarily targeted on what we're doing. But if you think about a market for ecosystems, right, and sort of believe that this is a way of financing projects, there's always a demand side and there's a supply side. And the supply side is project proponents, people doing reforestation, conservation, NGOs, communities, governments, tribes, individual landowners. And then there's a demand side, and most people think of the demand side as people buying carbon credits. And how we usually think of demand is anything that provides money into projects, because it takes money. If you want to go plant trees or you want to do conservation, like there has to be some sort of financial mechanism in order to do that work. And so there's been a lot of sort of noise in the carbon market, sort of startup technology land around like marketplaces and tokenizing credits and ways of distributing credits. And actually I think as an organization believe that that's sort of a relatively easy problem. The hard problem is really around investments. And you can take a comparison, think about solar as an example. It's a well-defined, asset class that investors can put billions of dollars into and start new projects and then sort of buy those projects when it's de-risked. And that doesn't exist for reforestation conservation right now. So it's a very sort of nascent niche thing that gets a lot of attention, but hasn't actually been scaled up to any real meaningful level right now. So our premise and what we've done over the past few years is really focus on supply. What are the tools, the technology, the financing structures that need to exist in order for a land steward just to get paid for doing something good? What we haven't done yet, I would say, is truly address demand. And that's about building financial instruments so that individuals, members of your family or yourselves, and then also institutions, big banks and pension funds can invest in something that's actually good. And so, I sort of address this. Obviously, carbon markets are growing. Whether we think they're a good thing or not, this is sort of the mechanism that civilization has decided on right now to incentivize reforestation and conservation. So there's a lot of money going into this area. And we've done a few things, and this is really just to spark conversation because I don't really feel like selling Earthshot as a investment right now. You can call me after if you're interested. But there's got to be a way of changing the experience of a land steward to have it be easier. I developed carbon projects, 4 or 5 years ago before starting this, and it was really hard. And if you think about the experience of a tribe or a small community in the Amazon or another rural region, they don't have $1 million to go spend on consultants to develop a carbon project. We need to solve that complexity for them. And so that's what we've done. We've built an automated system for doing this, where a lot of the agency and power lives with the land stewards, called LandOS. We've also built an app called Biome. It's a cool app. Basically, does verification in tree plots. It uses neural architecture to do tree segmentation, and it's basically just a way of having an individual land steward be able to verify the carbon, biodiversity, tree species on their land without having to have a professional verifier come through. So you can see the species identification, tree measurements, etc. Another core area that needed to be solved before really making the carbon market an efficient mechanism is around ecosystem forecasting. So this is really one of the areas that we specialized in. Actually, how we started out as a scientific institution with a bunch of academic collaborations. And it's relatively easy, using biome and satellite imagery to assess what's on the ground now. What trees are there? How big are they? But the bigger question is, how fast do they grow? And more like, how fast will they grow in the future? That's what's really needed in order to sort of drive an investment. And so this is around predictive modeling, taking this big global ecosystem model called CLM Fates. It's a functional sort of like physics model that sort of models trees growing and all sorts of biogeochemical interactions, as well as machine learning, where you take satellite imagery and ground truth data and you take the past and you predict it out into the future. And those combined models give much more accurate predictions of what will happen, around water or around temperatures or around species suitability out into the future. So that's pretty cool. I'm gonna stop screen sharing because I think maybe there's one last thing that I would love to share, and it's how I see the next few years of basically ordinary people being able to participate in this. Because right now, there kind of isn't a way for you to actually engage in reforestation unless you're doing it yourself or doing small donations. And one of the premises is that individuals and institutions need to be able to act with their money to be able to invest in these sort of projects. And so right now we're in the process of structuring a bridge finance vehicle to get projects off the ground. And at some point in the next 2-3 years, we need a liquid instrument, sort of like how there's carbon ETFs or other ways of investing in public securities that normal folks can invest in with their retirement or whatever. But that's still a couple years off, and there's many things that need to be developed to make carbon markets that mature of an asset class. So if you want to collaborate, send me a note. I'm sure Matt can get my email, troy@earthshot.eco, or go to earthshot.eco to learn more. And very happy to open to collaborations, land stewards, other organizations, funding organizations, or people who just want to know more about how they can engage with this as a topic. So I think that's all for now.
Okay, awesome. I have a few things I want to bring up, and then we'll see if the audience has any questions there, if the other panelists who are in this room have any questions. Earlier today we had Fred from Open Forest Protocol. Are you familiar with those guys? And what's similar, what's different?
That's a great question. So one is, I mean, I really admire what they're doing. So essentially, what they're building is sort of a platform where different different organizations or individuals within the creation of a credit or buying a credit can click into a set protocol. I think that's really great. I think that there will be incredible challenges with fraud in a decentralized system where people get paid. So that's one thing that hasn't yet been sort of solved. But what's different is I would say we're not innovating at the level of a protocol. You know, we're using all conventional regulatory systems, Vera regulatory markets. There's only so much innovation that can happen at one time to form a sustainable business while still sort of pushing the edge. And so I'd say where we're pushing the edge is around the science, around ecosystem forecasting, around technology tools like Biome and Land OS to actually give power into the hands of land stewards, and then financial engineering, but not necessarily changing the way the sort of protocol or information flow goes between different parties. But very happy to collaborate with them as sort of their technology matures.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess the way I understand what they're doing, I mean, when you say because it's decentralized, there's the possibility of fraud. Are you meaning like the data itself is could be fraudulent, or the interpretation of the data might be fraudulent? Because I mean, my understanding is they're enabling, the landowner or the community to,
Yeah.
sort of go around with an app and take pictures of things and upload that information. And then they have, I think right now, like 20, I'll call them experts, and maybe, I don't know, maybe you'll disagree with that term, but that's how it's sort of described to me, that look at that data and then sort of either give it a thumbs up or thumbs down. But I still think then there's even additional layer where the market sort of is going to decide the price on that carbon, credit,
Yeah.
like, and the data supposedly is all there and transparent. He did say they just, and they're fairly new, so they just recently did turn down a project. He said, he did, and obviously there's probably an incentive not to do that, but he did think it at least gives him some credibility that that the group. I don't know exactly how many of the 20 have to vote thumbs up or thumbs down, on it. I'm not familiar with that detail, but maybe you can kind of
I mean,
just
to be clear, I think it's a great idea. I think having the agency live within the hands of the land steward is a brilliant, brilliant idea. It's just going to be a long road. It's going to be years before we figure this out together. So by no means are we competing. We're all trying to figure it out together.
No,
And
sure.
there's not easy
I guess
solutions in
I'm
this
just wondering, because I know
industry.
a number of people in the satellite imagery space. So, it seems like to me that satellite imagery can be at least used as a spot check on some of the, user uploaded data, to make sure they're matching. And if they're not matching, then you need to figure out why they're not, matching.
Mhm. Yeah, I don't want to go too down the fraud route because I can think of 1,000 ways to scam a system like this. If anyone's ever on this interview has ever or this group has ever worked at a payments company, you'll know what I'm talking about. Overnight, there will be a whole consortium of people that will figure out the system and figure out, even for $100, you'll have documentation, you'll have land titles, you'll have photos that are indistinguishable from a real project. It won't even exist. And so I just sort of know how hard this is, and so don't want to be naive in
Yeah.
setting up systems that are built for scale. For anyone who's worked at PayPal, I worked at Airbnb in the early days with the fraud and built the fraud system. And like, it's a hard problem.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it happens in both decentralized and centralized. I mean, you look at a Bernie
Absolutely.
Madoff, they were just making up documents and what have you, showing account balances that were fictitious.
Yeah. But
Obviously that
other than the
seems one of,
fraud,
huh?
which is sort of like, we'll figure that out. Are there any other thoughts or like questions in this? Like, how do we make reforestation conservation scale and an investable asset class. Like that's really the core here, because it'll
Yeah,
deal with the
yeah.
challenges.
So I mean, I think one of Fred's premises was the building trust and transparency. So that's kind of the flip side of fraud, right? And it becomes more investable when there is trust and transparency. Was his premise, and I think yeah. So I think I think that would help. I think people recognizing the need for the problem to be solved would help. I think, returns like Rich from Carbon Growth Partners down in Australia. And I know they launched a fund, I think in 2021, mid 2021, and through mid 2022, their first year was like a 60% return. So that has to have some appeal to investors. Tiff Potter, is with Viridios Capital. They have measurement tools, and she used to be with Gold Standard. And so they provide some measurement and evaluation tools of what they consider fair carbon pricing, I guess. And they also have a fund. I don't know what the time frame on theirs was, but she mentioned a 25% return. So I think those things, are going to attract investors who even don't care about the climate. And then there's some that, hey, just want a market return. But if they can do it in a, biodiversity, climate friendly way, that helps humans and helps the planet, then they're more than happy to do that. So I think one of the problems that we're sort of facing has to do with a survey that I just read the results on recently about how far Democrats and Republicans are apart on prioritizing climate or prioritizing the environment or the economy. And I actually find flaws with the survey from the get-go, but basically this is a survey question that's been asked in one of two orders going back to the 70s or 80s. Which do you prioritize, environment or economy? And so it used to be the Republicans were over 50%, as were Democrats. And now Democrats still are in quite a bit over 50%, but the Republicans have dropped down into the 20s. And I think, to me, it's a false question. And why does it have to be one or the other? And in fact, maybe in the short term, it is one or the other. You can have policies that are anti-environment, but pro, economy growth short term. But I think longer term, I think we need to realize that without an environment, without a planet that's habitable, there isn't really much of an economy. And when we run, environmental deficits, that might juice, returns for a short period of time, just like running deficits. You can live a high, lifestyle running deficits, but eventually you end up having to pay those back, and then you have to scrimp after that. And so I think getting people to realize that, I think, is part of the solution. I don't know. What do you think there, Troy?
It seems obvious.
Yeah. I mean, it seems obvious. I guess, I don't know. What else do you think there is? So I mentioned a couple different things. What do you think the solution is? I mean, I think, people seeing returns, people don't want to be the first one in. They have this premise that, impact investing is somehow philanthropy. And it can be. I mean, there are impact investments.
There's a bunch of different levels here. One is that, yes, there actually does need to be a transition from the prioritization of a return on capital to something that is actually better for the whole. That needs to happen, but I don't expect it to happen. So in the meantime, what we need to do is create systems that treat nature for the ecosystem services that it is providing civilization, and price that appropriately into regulation and taxes, and also into rewards for those that are doing something good. And that can look like carbon markets, that can look like policy, that can look like carbon taxes, TNFD, and climate and nature disclosures. All those will be really great. So on one level, it is a cultural and, sort of shift in perspective. And another level, it is a financial shift that needs to go on, where we need to be as clever and rigorous about financial tools that we build to incentivize reforestation and conservation. And, I was just looking at uh, Tiffany's note on like 4-year lock-ins, and like, yeah, we need to actually be able to structure financial vehicles that match the incentive structures of investors. And there's a bunch of challenges with that. Like, hey, trees take a long time to grow. Investors don't have a lot of time to invest. That means we need to establish and segment risk. We need to sort of like align time with what investors are able to do. The fund that we're raising right now will be sort of a bridge vehicle where it's sort of a 2-3 year, revolving capital for early stage projects, but then it needs to get taken out by a very long-term sort of green infrastructure fund that needs to have liquidity because no one holds projects for 30 years. So, there's a lot of sort of like geeky technical stuff in this, but if anyone wants to learn more,